This book tasted like predictability and dull expectations. Like anticipation falling flat and a 2-star rating. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Nia TV, and here's everything I read in the month of June/May. So guys, this video had to be combined because I am a little bit behind on my reading schedule and my posting schedule. Now that I've got that out of the way, let's get started on my monthly reads. The first thing I want to talk about this month is the Red Queen series. So as you guys may know, if you've been following my monthly reads videos, I have been reading this since March. Okay, to be fair, I did start the series at the end of March, and the end of the year was just super busy. I want to say this series kind of put me in a little bit of a slump, but I finally finished War Storm, the last book in this series. This is my first time rereading this series, so I wanted to give you guys my initial thoughts. We're gonna start from the very first book, The Red Queen. Our protagonist, Mare Barrow, is living in a world divided by blood, red and silver. Those with silver blood have special abilities like telekinesis, fire bending, water bending, whatever. You get the gist, okay? They have superpowers. And those with red blood do not. Those with red blood are also very oppressed by the silvers in their society. Now, Mare has red blood, and one day she discovers she has superpowers, but her blood is red. So we get to follow her journey. This is a dystopian YA novel. And while all of this is happening, there's also a rebellion. I honestly think the first book in this series really set the tone for what it was gonna be. It was a really good way to set up the world that they live in, the characters, and some of the common themes that we'll see throughout the series. I would also say that this book was very political. This entire series was very political. If you're more into the politics of it all, I would definitely go check out this series. I gave this a ranking before, I'm pretty sure, but I would like to rank this I'll give this a 4-star. The second book in the series was Glass Sword. So obviously after the events in the first book happen, this is kind of the aftermath, and I feel like we're still at a beginning stage in this book, so it's still introducing a lot of characters and a lot of ideas that we're going to focus on in this series. I remember liking the second book a lot more the first time I read it back in like 2022, but rereading it now, this is where I started to slow down because I had a lot going on, but also because I was getting character fatigue. We were meeting a lot of characters, and we already met a lot of characters in the first book, but especially with this book, I was just getting really tired of whatever was going on. I was like, okay, like I get we're building up, but are half these people even going to be relevant in the later books? Kind of in passing, but like not really, you know? It was definitely a good read, and I don't think it's gonna stop anybody else from continuing the series. I just kind of had a problem with it this time. I'm gonna give it a 3.5 star. King's Cage, the third book in the series. Guys, I'm gonna be honest, I think this was my favorite book out of the entire series. I feel like this really fleshed out the world building so much, and it built up one of our main characters, our antagonist, and it was just the most interesting. Throughout the series, I really liked her prose, but I feel like especially in this book, like the way she was writing, the way she was describing things just had me hooked. I would say that this was the best book out of the entire series, even though towards the end I did get into a bit of a slump, but like I said, that was just because I was busy. The one thing I will say though is this is where we start to switch perspectives between our main character and some of our side characters like Cameron. You'll meet her in the second book. I didn't really care for Cameron's perspective at all, I'm gonna be honest. And I get why she had to be there, because I find that a lot of the time authors will use multiple perspectives or multi-perspectives or dual perspectives just to reiterate how somebody was feeling about the same events. Victoria Aveyard does not do that. And that's what I really appreciated about it, because she's obviously trying to build up not only different characters, but different things that are going on in the series while Mare may be away from some of the other people that she encounters. So nothing was really repetitive in this book, and that's what I appreciated. But I don't know, I just felt like even though Cameron was a good character, I didn't really care to hear from her, because I was just like, why? Like, why Cameron of all people? I don't know, like, we could have picked somebody else. Like, I don't know, it just felt like it defaulted to her. I really liked this. I would honestly give this one a 4 star. And now, the last book in the series, War Storm. Can I just say, this was my least favorite out of the entire series. I hated this book. I was so ready to be done. I'll give Victoria Aveyard the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was the fact that I had been on this series for 4 months already and was ready to move on to something else. And this book and the last book kind of put me into a little bit of a slump, especially this book. Maybe it was the fact that everything in this book felt so uneventful. I felt like there were a lot of unnecessary scenes in this book that could have been cut. This book is 650 something pages. It didn't need to be. Whoever her editor is, fire them, because seriously, why was this so long for nothing to happen? Nothing happened. Like I don't know. Stuff obviously happened, and obviously the ending is kind of what you would expect from it. Our antagonist is defeated, but like I felt so annoyed the whole time. The perspectives in this book, I did not like the people we chose. One of the perspectives we hear from is Evangeline, and in the book she is a silver with the power to manipulate metal. Okay, I like her. I actually thought that her perspective was appropriate because, like I said, it was used to tell the story, to build the story, to build on her character and some of her issues, and comment some more on the politics in this book. That was good. Who I didn't like hearing from was Iris. She's one of our antagonists. She was so annoying. She was so annoying. I did not care about her. I didn't care about her whining. She was introduced in King's Cage. I just felt like it was completely irrelevant. It technically did build on the politics and the structure from her perspective, but there was just a lot of nothing going on. She said a bunch of nothing. She was so annoying just for her to like not even do anything in the end. You know what I mean? Like, she was a threat, but was she? Like, you know, what really was the nail on the cake was the ending. The ending felt unfinished, but also rushed because you have this many pages and you didn't do anything with it. The ending was unclear and not satisfying, in my opinion, and I understand. Let me preface with this. There is a novella or extra book in the series called Broken Throne. It's full of short stories. The first time I read this book, I never read that. And I think I actually blanked out the ending of this book in my mind, or like this entire book after the first time I read it, because like I literally didn't remember anything from this. And I was like, I see why, because like nothing happened. Like so much happened, but nothing happened. And it was so annoying. Maybe I could have gotten a clearer ending to the world that we just built up, to the structures that we have been trying to take down the entire time throughout the series. Maybe the ending could have been clearer if I read the novella. This book was so long and I'm ready to be done with this series. So even though this is my reread and this is definitely my chance to read the 5th book, I will not, because I'm done. And I know that book is even longer than this, even longer. And I just feel like if this is your main series, the main 4, why don't you finish and complete and tie up all the loose ends in this? Because it's the main series. So I would give this book, honestly, a 2.5 star. Now for this series as a whole, it was really good. This is definitely a YA classic, and I would recommend that my kids in the future read this book. You know what I mean? There was a lot to like about it. I just personally didn't like the way it ended. If you're looking for like a political book that has like really interesting world building, especially in this 3rd book, go ahead and read this. I would rank this series a a 3.5 star, but this last book was not it for me. And that is what ruined my June reads, okay? All right. The next book that I read in the month of June was The Tales of Arcana Fortune. I just finished this book yesterday and I read it immediately after ending Warstorm because I was so unsatisfied with the ending and I needed to get myself out of a slump. So the best way to do that is to find any book and just pick it up and just force yourself to read it. Now, when I was looking for my next book to read, I checked my notes app list with books that I have been waiting on reading this entire year. And this was on there, and this was also already downloaded in my digital library. So that's why I decided to go ahead and start the book. And also I was looking for something very fairy tale-esque, very whimsical, and I will say this was definitely that. The Tales of Arcana Fortune follows Serena Rose. She is a healer and she has to look after her family's library. And she lives in a town all by herself where she's outcasted from many of the people around her because she's not like them. She doesn't live her life like them. And she's described as eccentric, especially in comparison to the boring people around her. Now, one day, her and a mysterious stranger they're cursed to live out 7 fairy tales. I have a lot to say about this book. I also have a lot to complain about this book, guys. The main things that I had a problem with in this book were the pacing, the writing style, and the world building. Okay. The first part of the book was really good in terms of pacing and setup. I really enjoyed that and I was like, yes, this book has a lot of potential. And that is kind of the overarching problem that I had with all these different parts that I discussed about the book. This book had so much potential and it didn't live up to it. The execution was not as great and that was my problem with the pacing. So like I said, our main character and our main male character were cursed to live out 7 fairy tales. They spent 2 chapters in each fairy tale. They spent 2 10-page chapters in each fairy tale. Now, that wouldn't be that bad, except it is because I just felt like we weren't really fleshing out the story around us and fleshing out some of the themes that we had. Next thing I want to talk about is the storytelling of it all. My problem with this book was that she was doing a lot of telling and not showing. Now, when I read any book, but especially a fantasy series, I really want to feel like I'm in the world. Like she was just recounting events that happened. It would be like, Serena was tired. Serena is turning around and she opened the door. But imagine that for like 360 pages, like, I don't know. And maybe also part of this was because my copy didn't have the artwork in it. Maybe we were supposed to see the art, but I feel like as a writer, you should be able to write the story and we shouldn't have to see like your artwork to understand what's going on, to feel what's going on. It wasn't really moving me. It messed up the pacing because you're just like telling me what happened, but like you don't actually want to like fully flesh out what's going on around you. Another part of the storytelling that I didn't like was that there was no conflict. Now, what I mean when I say that was there were obviously problems because you literally cannot have a story without problems, but every time the characters had a problem, there was an immediate solution. The way she told her story kind of reminded me of when I was younger. I would love to play with my dolls, my littlest pet shops, my Shopkins, and every time I would play, I would hate for them to have major problems that just could not be solved because I loved them so much and I didn't want to see anything bad happen to them. I felt like the author had that type of attachment to her characters that she didn't want to let them have their own personal flaws. She didn't want to let them like face any grave challenges. There were no stakes. You know what I mean? It's reassuring to know that your main characters will get out of the problem. Obviously, we knew that they were going to get out of the problem eventually because there were however many pages left in each chapter and in the entire book, there was always an immediate solution. Like they wouldn't really have to struggle for anything. For example, there was this one moment in the book where she was in this one fairy tale where she had to like turn hay into gold. I don't remember what fairy tale this was. There was like a jester or a gnome or something, and the main male character in this particular fairy tale had to be the gnome or or whatever. He had to be like that character. The way she was supposed to get out of this story was by remembering his name. Literally, I kid you not, the way they solved it was in like passive conversation. Like she was talking about something stupid and he was like complaining about her being like, yeah, like you really do live up to your name. And then she was like, it's not my fault you always have to be so grim. And then she's like, Grim, that's your name. Like, oh my God. I was like, what? Like you just solved that in 2 seconds, in 2 sentences.
That's not good writing.
What am I reading right now? Like who wrote this? My problem is they would give names to the people in the fairy tales, and I was expecting that we were gonna see them again, or the people in the fairy tales would become like real characters or something. Then we would never see them again. We never re-entered that fairy tale. They weren't like reoccurring characters. And then my problem is like in the first fairy tale, she was like, I'll always remember them. I'll always be so grateful for the way they helped me. They did nothing. They had 2 sentences, and I thought that we were gonna like get to build out those characters too and kind of connect back to our overarching theme of loneliness, because like I said, Serena's an outcast in her town and she doesn't have any friends aside from the male main character, which is also her love interest. And don't even get me started on that, on the pacing. She fell in love with him within like a week. And I'm like, girl, I know you're lonely, but dang. That's why I was like, oh, maybe we're gonna like make the people in the fairy tales her friends and stuff. We could have done so much more. The execution was not it. The ending was pretty obvious and it wasn't even like well done, and it had more potential to be good and it wasn't. And guys, this is not to say that I didn't enjoy the book, because like I said, I was in a really bad reading slump and I needed something whimsical and silly and whatever. And this did bring me some joy, but also I had some problems because I'm just like, wow, like I should rewrite this because this was not the greatest, honestly. There's gonna be a book 2. There's still some mystery left, but I don't care. But it was cute. I would give this like a 2-star, maybe even a 1.5, to be honest. Now moving on to everything that I will be reading in the month of July. Guys, it is not often that I hate everything I read. I finished the books that I was going to read for next month, this month. So I was like, I can't make another video on it, but I have to give my thoughts. I have to tell somebody. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the bad before I talk about the good. Remember how I said I was gonna reread the Caraval series? The Caraval series follows these 2 sisters, Scarlet and Donatella. Now in the first book, they have never left the island that they were raised on, and they're stuck with their abusive father. Until one day, they receive invitations for a magical game called Caraval. When they receive those invitations, they find a way to sneak away from their abusive father and play the game. When Scarlet gets there, our protagonist for the first book, she realizes her sister is missing and she has to find her as a part of the game. I want to preface this with the first book was not that bad. I didn't hate the first book, actually. It kind of reminded me of like Frozen a little bit, and how like the bond between 2 sisters was like the most important thing ever. And I thought that the first time I read the series. I was like, the first book, it was cute. It's definitely a YA book. Rereading this series 9 months later has made me realize maybe I just need to take a break from YA books. Maybe I just need to stop reading them altogether. I am clearly too mature for this because this is just ridiculous. This is ridiculous. But then again, I was looking at my bookshelf. You can see Legendborn is right here. I read that like 7 months ago. It was perfect. So I don't know, I think it actually is this series' fault, okay? So this series has a lot to do with magic and fantasy and mystery, but I felt that's exactly what it was lacking. This entire series leans more on the romance side. So if you're into that, go ahead. Don't get me wrong, I like romance. I used to not, but I feel like my problem with this book was that it was marketed as a fantasy than a romance. It seemed like in all of the books, it was romance inside a fantasy world, which if that's what you want, that's fine, but I just wanted more fantasy and more mystery while reading this series. The first book, it didn't bother me as much because I actually liked the couple that the protagonist was in, and it didn't take up as much of the story. In the second book, Legendary, it definitely took up the entire story. First of all, I would say the first time I read this, I hated the second book. And I knew, again, reading it, I was gonna hate it again. It was worse this time. I was like, oh my God, shut up. No one cares. Nobody asked. Get to the point. My problem the first time I read the second book was that it felt like Stephanie Garber was trying to write a completely different book. I finished it a couple days ago and I finished the third book right now. The second time I read this, I was like, you know, no, this actually does feel cohesive to the rest of the story. But the problem is the first book didn't get enough world building to make the second book feel like it would fit in the same universe. We get into an entire love triangle and I was just so irritated by it because it took up the entire story when we could be focusing on fleshing out the world, when we could be focusing on the mystery. We were doing whatever. The second book takes place from the other sister, Donatella's perspective, and I understand her character, but I think I don't like her because her perspective is always, it always has to do with her two love interests or her love triangle. Like, yes, we need to hear about that, but you need to move on. And even by the end of the second book, I feel like her story did not get a proper conclusion with that love triangle. Like, it was obvious who she was gonna end up with the entire time, but like, we just got no conclusion to the point where it bled into the third book, which is what prompted me to actually just sit down and make this video today, because I was like, you know, the third book is fresh on my mind. The first time I read it, I thought the third book was the best out of all three of them. But this time I was just getting annoyed because we were still dealing with all the loose ends from the second book and Donatella's story, to the point where it distracted from the cool things that we could have had in the third book, which the third book is dual perspective. It takes place from both Donatella and Scarlet's stories. But the problem is Donatella's story, her little love triangle, bombarded the entire thing, the entire fantasy aspect, the entire mystery. Like, Scarlet's story was so cool this entire book, but we didn't really hear about it until the last 10 chapters, because every time you would read the book, it would be Donatella, 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 Scarlet, Scarlet, Donatella, Donatella, Scarlet, Donatella. Why are we focusing on this girl who has nothing to say? She has nothing to say the entire time. I try to avoid Goodreads as much as possible while I'm reading books because I don't want it to influence my opinion, but sometimes I can't help it and I do have to check Goodreads either before, during, or after I read the book. While I was rereading this time, I just had to check it because I was so curious to see what people were saying. I was like, I can't be the only one who hated on this. A common thing that I saw while I was looking through Goodreads was people's problem with the prose. Now, throughout the story, Garber uses this purple prose that I felt really fit with the entire fantasy aspect of the story and the magic of the story. I listened to the audiobook for this, so it actually didn't bother me that much. I can guarantee if I had to read this, I probably would have been more bothered the second and first time reading this series. My problem listening to it the second time over is that I noticed how much her metaphors within her writing style don't really make any sense. This is an exact quote, but I can't remember what the context was. It was within the first book. She was like, he tasted like midnight and wind. What does that mean? What does midnight and wind taste like? What could that possibly mean? You pulled that out of your butt crack, because that makes no sense whatsoever. And like listening to the audiobook, it really was not that bad, but if I had to read it, I definitely would have like dropped this entire series, because what are you even talking about? One of my favorite Goodreads reviews. Somebody said, this book tasted like predictability and dull expectations, like anticipation falling flat and a 2-star rating. I can't even lie, they were absolutely right, because this had so much potential to be a really cool fantasy world, like with a cool magical system and lots of mystery. There were barely any stakes, and when there were stakes, there was potential, but you know, like nothing really happened, I'm gonna be honest. So it's not even her best. And the reason why I decided to reread this series this time is because it was the only audiobook aside from The Cruel Prince that was available to me. I also decided to reread it because I wanted to get into her next part of the series, Once Upon a Broken Heart, because I was like, guys, you know what? Maybe this spin-off is better than the original.
Buddy, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started on Once Upon a Broken Heart. This video is already long enough. I can confidently say I will not be reading Stephanie Garber again, because I think I've had enough. Straight up, I've had enough.
For the first book, I'll give it a 3-star. For the second book, I give it a 1. I'll give that last one, yeah, maybe I'll give it a 3. But overall, this series was not that good, and low-key, like, it's overhyped by BookTok. It's overhyped by everybody. Guys, we could do so much better. Moving on to the next book that I said I was gonna read this month, Elemental P by Mark Dunn. This book was really cool. The book was written through a series of letters, and I just absolutely adored the way that each letter was written. Like, the people of Nolopton, they have such a whimsical and jovial way of communicating with each other, even through the worst of times when they're losing the ability to use the letters freely within their alphabet. This entire book is about totalitarianism and how extreme a government can get, and freedom of speech. And I thought the entire thing was really cool. This book kind of ended where you would expect it to end. It was satisfying. Like, this was a good read. If you have just a day where you want to pick up a book and finish a book all in one day, definitely go read this book. It was really good, and it had some like really interesting lessons and concepts within it that I think could be talked about. All right, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed me hating on every single book, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, don't forget to subscribe.